Good evening again. Are we still keeping warm? Last week read a story about a little boy who slept in a snow cloud. And we said, well, maybe for him it was nice and fluffy and warm. But for us, to sleep in the snow is not so very comfortable. What would you do if you had nowhere to sleep and you were out in the cold? Nowhere to go? Maybe you would have a friend who could let you in to keep warm. And in this case, the friend is a park ranger. This book is called One Snowy Night. It's by Nick Butterworth. Want to hear a funny story? Well, I mean, this could be a funny story too, but I mean, at the library, we have two different books called One Snowy Night, and they are both written by people whose names start with B-U-T, so they have the same call number on the back, E-B-U-T. But they're two different books. The other book is a Christmas story, and maybe you checked it out when we had all the Christmas books on display. But this story is just a winter story of one snowy night by Nick Butterworth. It's cold in the park in winter, but Percy, the park keeper, doesn't mind. He puts on his warm coat and his big scarf and wears 2 pairs of woolly socks inside his Wellington boots. Percy likes to be out in the fresh air. Just bundle up warm enough. In the middle of the park, there's a little hut. This is where Percy lives. When it gets too cold to be outside, Percy goes into his hut where it's cozy and warm. The animals who live in the park all know Percy's hut. Every day, he shares his lunch with them. One winter's night, it was so cold that it began to snow. Great big snowflakes fell past the window of Percy's hut. "Brrr," said Percy. "I think I'll need an extra blanket tonight." He made himself some hot cocoa. Do you like hot cocoa when it's cold? Got ready for bed. If you just had some hot cocoa, I hope you brushed your teeth afterwards before you got into bed. I think that's what he means by get ready to bed. Suddenly, Percy heard a tapping sound. There was somebody at the door. Who do you think it could be? Who can that be at this time of night, thought Percy. He went to the door and looked out. There, on the step, was a squirrel. It looked very cold and miserable. "I can't get to sleep, Percy," said the squirrel. "My bed is full of snow." "Oh dear," said Percy. "Never mind. I've got plenty of room for 2. The squirrel snuggled down next to Percy, soon began to feel warm. It was the door again. Now who can that be? Thought Percy. Standing outside were 2 shivering rabbits. "It's freezing," said one rabbit. "We're frozen," said the other. "You poor thing," said Percy. "Come in and warm up." The rabbit squeezed into the bed next to Percy and the squirrel. There wasn't much room. "Could you face the other way?" Percy asked the squirrel. "Your tail is tickling my nose." "Oh Oh dear, said Percy. Now there's someone else at the door. It was, any guesses? Who's that? A fox. He looked very cold and hungry. Can I come in too? He asked. Percy scratched his head, thought for a minute. Well, if you promise to behave, he said. I promise, said the fox, and he squeezed into bed next to all the other animals. Bump! Oops! The squirrel fell out. Who did that? The squirrel asked crossly. Good gracious, said Percy. It's the door again. This time Percy had quite a surprise. There on the step was a badger, 2 ducks, a hedgehog, and a whole family of mice. They all wanted a bed for the night. Do you think he has a bed for them? Poor old Percy, and poor old Percy's bed. The animals pushed and shoved and rolled around the bed, but there was just not enough room for them all. Soon the bed covers ended up in a big, tight ball. Then, bump! The covers rolled right off the bed, and everybody fell on the floor. Oh dear, said Percy, this won't do at all. My bed is just too small. Suddenly, one of the mice pricked up his ears. What's that noise? He squeaked. Everyone listened hard. Now, they could all hear it. There was a scratching, scraping sound. It seemed to be coming from underneath them. There's something moving under the floor, whispered Percy. The animals looked frightened, and the mice all started to squeak at once. Oh dear, what can it be? It might be a monster with fierce claws and sharp teeth. The noise grew louder and louder. Then one of the floorboards began to move. Look out, it's coming up through the floor! Suddenly there was a loud creak. Help! Cried the animals, and they all ran to hide. But Percy wasn't frightened. He started to chuckle. Then he laughed out loud. A small, dark head was sticking up through the floorboards. You see who that is? This isn't a monster, said Percy. It's a mole. I'm sorry to burst in like this, said the mole. I knocked on the door, but nobody heard me. Percy helped the mole up through the hole in the floor, sat him on his hot water bottle to get warm, and put the floorboard back. It's all right, everyone, he called. You can come out now. But nobody moved. Nobody stirred. Nobody wanted to come out. The squirrel was tucked away in the pocket of Percy's dressing gown. The hedgehog was in his coat. The fox, the rabbit, the badger, the ducks were all safely hidden away all throughout the house. The mice had even squeezed themselves into Percy's slippers. Everyone had found a cozy bed. Well, I never, said Percy. Percy yawned, snuggled down in his own bed once again. That's better. Now I've got plenty of room, he said, little to spare for a mole. The end. Well, there's there room enough in your bed for you and any of your friends who might pop on by in the middle of the night to keep warm? We'll see about that. You stay warm and stay cuddled and have a good night's sleep. And I'll see you next week.